Hi everyone, I am Mike. I am a certified professional and assistant instructor with the National Wood Flooring Association. And today, courtesy of Floor & Decor, we are here to run you through a presentation of what it means to design and install custom borders into a hardwood floor. As we all know, hardwood floors are going to be the one type of floor covering that will provide the biggest return on investment for a client. That's based on studies from designer association, builder associations, and so on and so forth. So it's definitely a tool that you want to have in your arsenal. It's going to, again, enhance the look of the space. It's going to provide increased value, and why not be a great source of additional income for you. We are going to divide the presentation in a couple of stages, from design, from layout, from actual production and milling of the pieces, and then going into the installation part. Going right into it, we have here two colors of the same product. We are dealing with a solid hardwood floor. It is a white plank available at Floor & Decor. Great product. And one of the colors, very dark, can have a very rich, elegant look, but nothing better than to emphasize that, enhance the look by adding a custom border. Whether you want to do that in a dining room or a formal entry, you want to have maybe a crossboard at a transition between two different areas, or just have a nice little border around the fireplace, this is a great idea to add that design element. We have on the design side any particular example from very, very plain one board going around the perimeter. It's just a nice little way to tie the installation into the wall, and we can go as intricate as pattern, from a chevron between bands to soldier courses to triangles, you name it, sky's the limit as far as design elements. One thing we need to keep in mind, depending on the product we work with, we want to make sure to abide by the National Wood Flooring Association guidelines as far as the installation. That's not just going to result in a nice, aesthetically pleasing product, but it's also going to be one that's going to perform in the long run as far as variations in relative humidity, moisture, temperature, and so on. If you have a properly installed floor, you will make sure that that floor will perform in the long run. Want to show you a couple of different examples of how we can add this element to a floor. From having a simple border going around our straight install, we can then add small little pieces. We call this a soldier course, that can either be mitered with a 45-degree angle to encase our flooring, or they can be cabin stacked where they are just added together. We're going to divide this presentation into a couple of stages. First, obviously, is going to be the design. When thinking of designing this, you obviously want to bring your client in. They're going to have their own input, they're going to have their own ideas, but you're also going to be thinking about the material that's available for you. Within the Floor & Decor inventory, you will have a lot of choices. You want to make sure your client agrees and obviously embraces your design, and you make the best choice for their space. Once we determine that, we are going to figure out the layout of your border or design element. In figuring that out with the spacing, obviously we need to think of the scale of the whole border within the space. If you have a 10-foot wide room, you will not want to put a 3-foot wide border, because that's going to look a little bit constricted. So keeping that in mind, you also want to make sure that you allow your floor to have that necessary expansion gap. Right here, we're working with a 5-inch wide plank. So if we were to choose a single border around the perimeter, we need to make sure that whatever the manufacturer requires as far as expansion space, we will allow that space in addition to the width of the board. I want to show a couple of samples on this panel. We already have them installed. This would be your single border. It's a nice contrast that will enhance the look of that space. In addition, we can add multiple bands. It's still a pretty simple design, but it can have a pretty dramatic impact. Moving on, if you want to add different elements, make it more interesting, we will mill out of the same material different pieces. Again, we call this a soldier course. When we have small pieces with the grain running perpendicular to the main field, this can be encased between two borders, and we can have either the same color or alternating colors for a more dramatic impact. The border can wrap around the perimeter, just like we showed in this corner over here with our soldier course. Or for an added element of interest, we can stop the border along the side runs and then add another design element, which would be a corner detail. In this case, we chose to have a border encasing alternating colored triangles. So this would be the corner of your room, and any border that you would choose to go on the long runs would basically end on each side of your corner detail. Now, size on this is obviously arbitrary. You will only be restricted by the size of the material we're working with. In this case, we have a 5-inch wide. This is going to be, we milled this to full width. We chose to have a 2.5-inch border. That in total will take us to 15 inches, which would equal exactly 3 boards wide. We can see that element on this corner right here. We chose a different design element for this corner. This would be a starburst. And again, all of these pieces are milled from our existing material. Once we have our design chosen, it's time to think about how to obtain the elements that compose your design. We will choose our measurements, again, based on how we lay it out, the dimensions that need to make sense in the room. And then it's time to actually cut the elements. We want to make sure, especially when we use 2 different colors or even sizes, why not? We need to make sure that the milling will work together so that we obtain a very good looking end product. All of your flooring is going to be tongue and groove, so we want to make sure they work together flawlessly. In milling and constructing the design elements, we will have a couple of ways to do it. The preferred method for making repeatable cuts would be whatever type of saw you choose to mill them on, whether it's a chop saw or a table saw. You want to be able to obtain exact cuts with the minimal amount of error. For that, we would choose to install a stop block at the specified measurements. For example, this would be a square block. We have 5 inches by 5 inches. Once we measure and tune in that particular stop block, we will be able to now make as many repeatable cuts at the same exact size. Once the boards are cut to length, we will need to replicate the edge treatment. This particular floor is going to be a wire brushed, micro beveled floor on all 4 sides. Our pieces, once they are cut, they will not have a groove and they will not have a bevel. For that, it's a very easy process of touching up the border, the edge of the board, a little bit of sandpaper, touching up the color, making sure we get those splinters. And that is the same treatment that we applied to all of our pieces. Also, in the interest of a sturdy, long-lasting installation, we want to make sure all of our design elements are locked in with the same tongue and groove system as the field of your floor. For that, we will run each piece wherever it meets another one on a router that has a groove bit. We want to make sure we align the height of that groove to the same as the factory one. In this example, you can see all sides will fit perfectly with 0 or minimal overwood. This, in turn, once installed, will result in an aesthetically pleasing installation. Absolutely no sign or mark that these pieces were cut on site. We will later demonstrate how to cut back and install those pieces. As far as the milling goes, you will make sure that you allow sufficient material, because you will have a considerable amount of waste when compared to a regular straight lay. On the bright side, you will be able to use all the small pieces that otherwise you will not use in the middle of a room or a regular installation. With each piece that we use, we want to make sure to select and match the grade of the floor for an overall seamless look. The last thing you want to do is have all of this effort go into a floor and then certain pieces will not be accepted by your customer. Moving on, we're going to have to figure out the layout of your border. In that respect, one tool that I find priceless, and this is something that we use in the layout of any installation for that matter, would be tramel points. A lot of people nowadays will measure off the walls, measure off of a plywood seam, but as we all know, in time, houses settle, things can shift, and you can have a less than satisfactory result if you go that way. If you have a 18-foot wall and you want to measure off of the wall to put your straight line down, you might discover that that wall has a little bow in it or a little high spot, so that's going to throw off your entire install. For that reason, we use tramel points. The easiest way to describe tramel points would be thinking of a large compass where these would be the points of your compass, and this is what we call a beam. We can choose an arbitrary distance, so we can enlarge that compass as much as we need. As far as using the tramel points, I will cover that briefly. This does not require any math. This does not require any particular measurements, fixed numbers. Briefly, we will measure each side of the room once we establish the direction we want to go. We're measuring each side of the room, finding the center point on that wall and the opposite wall. We're going to snap a line on between the 2 points. That will give us the center line of the room in general. Measuring the length of that line, we can divide that to find the middle of it, which in turn will give us the center point of the room. That's where we start using the tramel points. By giving us equal measurements from that certain center point on both sides of the center line, we will then draw arches on either side of the room of that line that will intersect once we draw the lines from both points that we give ourselves. Snapping a line, a new line, between those two intersections of the arches will give us the perpendicular to the center line. Using this method, we can further divide that room into as many angles as we need to. For a straight installation, just that center line and the perpendicular is all that's needed to ensure that your installation is going to be a perfect straight line. You want to make sure that you explain this to your client, because seeing a room that's not perfectly square or a perfect rectangle where it has a wall that maybe runs off an inch and a half over 15 feet, your installation is going to be dependent on how you explain it to your customer. Your installation is straight. If there is a rip on one side of the room where you have a smaller width on one side that increases on the other side, you need to make sure they understand your installation is correct because you used the proper method. It is a matter of setting the right expectations. Based on those measurements, we prefer to measure for our border and design from that center line, from that center point. Because your border, your design element needs to be centered on the floor that you installed, which in turn will be centered in the room. We need to make sure if we put a border, again, 15, 18, 20 feet, looking down that line, we need to make sure that line is straight. Whenever you make a cut, you need to make sure that cut is straight. Otherwise, measuring from a wall, you might end up with a crooked line. When we think of the entire design with the field and the border around the perimeter, there are two ways to go about it. A lot of people still install the border because they think that's the design element, and then they will install the field in the middle. That would be the first method, where you install the border first. A second method, which in my opinion and generally it is the preferred method, would be to install the field first, run it proud of wherever we have our measurement for the border, because you will mark your room for the field and for the border before nailing the first board. So if we run the field proud of those markings, we can then come back, make one single cut, and that's going to be an exact cut, straight cut, and will eliminate a couple of things. Having a border installed first, that will mean each single row that dead ends into that border will need a perfect exact cut, where you will have to, again, replicate that factory edge treatment on each individual board. It will also mean a lot of waste, because a lot of times you will not be able to find a close enough piece where you just shave off a little bit so that your board will fit. Time consuming, a lot of potential for error, and a lot of waste. In order to avoid that, the second method, which would be installing the field first, would be preferred. You can run your field proud. You can choose pieces that, again, otherwise you would not use in another part of the installation, to make sure you just go over your marking, and then you would come back using a track saw or any kind of fixed border, fixed edge to run your saw against, and you would obtain one single perfect cut. All of your cuts are going to be perfectly lined up, no gaps, no angle differences, none of that. Making that edge treatment on a lot of boards at the same time, again, is going to be a significant time savings. We will now go into demonstrating the second method, which would be having the field installed first and then trimming to accommodate for our border. Okay, we've discussed the different methods to go about installing the border. Either border first and then making all those exact cuts, time consuming, material wasting, and a lot of potential for error. Now we are going to move into demonstrating what it means to install the field first and then cutting it back to our markings to accommodate for the new border. On this panel, like I said before, using the tramel point method, we marked the straight line for our starting point with the installation, and we also, from that line, we took measurements to accommodate the width of our border. In this case, we chose a 3-band wide border, which is a total of 15 inches, but we also allowed for an expansion space, which rule of thumb would be the same width as your product is thick. So if we're working with a 3/4 inch product, we will allow, so add to the 15 inches another 3/4 of an inch. Having our markings on both sides, and why not, you can use the tramel points and retrace your entire design after you install the field. We are going to be using a track saw, so we can align the track with our markings on both sides. We want to make sure we are set up, whatever type of saw you use, we are set up to accommodate for the thickness of the floor, cut all the way through, but definitely don't forget that maybe before you cut a 2x4, your blade is set too deep and you're going to cut all the way through the subfloor as well. So make sure you accommodate for exactly the thickness of your floor. In this case, we also accounted for the thickness of the track. Before making the cut and before using any kind of power tool on your project, the main priority obviously should be safety. So we will use our hearing protection, and then we will be using our eye protection. Anything bad happens, we will be hurt. One thing I forgot to mention as far as installing the field, the reason it's useful to mark for your border is when you install your field, you want to make sure you will not put any fasteners or any adhesive past that line. That in turn will make the removal of the excess very easy. You can see we have a perfectly straight cut right on our lines. No deviation, no angle tweaking. Maybe with a little bit of an error when we first laid the border, if you use the first method, we're not at a perfect 90. Maybe we are at a 89, 88, 91 degree angle. So that in turn will result in a lot of time wasting trying to perfectly adjust that angle on your saw. In this method, all of those problems, all of those time wasting problems are eliminated. We have a couple of more steps. Now we have to mill in our groove to accept either the tongue of our band if we're deciding to align it tongue facing in, or because every single piece needs to be locked in with the tongue and groove, we can choose to mill that groove and then use a slip tongue or a spline, which can be obviously ripped to size. This is something that you will find in floor and decor stores, and you will find the appropriate one for any thickness of the flooring that you might be using. Now we will be switching to a router that is fitted with a groove bit. We want to make sure to align that groove to match the factory edge. Whenever matching the factory edge, especially in a pre-finished floor, we will want to reference the top side of the board. Reason for that being, if in the milling process there are any kind of thickness tolerances between two boards, when we reference that groove off the bottom side, at the end of our installation, the bottom side will be aligned, obviously, because we are holding it together with a spline, but now any of those tolerances will be telegraphed and reflected in the top. So we want to avoid any kind of overwood between planks where one of them is sticking up. So instead of referencing the bottom, when adjusting the height of the bit, we will be referencing the top. Once again, personal protection equipment. This is the end result of our grooving. Because the bit is perfectly fitted to the material we are working on. It's a 1/4 inch grooving bit. Our spline fits perfectly. Any piece of wood we would install is held down tight. The last thing we need to make sure of is to, again, replicate that factory edge along our newly cut side. There we go. We have a newly cut edge that when we put a factory edge and our new edge together, we're gonna have the exact same bevel profile that we would have in a regular 2-hole boards with factory edge. Those would be the steps for accommodating for our border. Now, obviously off-site or on-site, off the actual floor, you would be milling your pieces for the border, all your elements. In this case, I will show how we can incorporate one of those corner details. We have all the pieces milled here. They are all grooved. They are all beveled on all sides. So once they are put together, nobody, including your client, will be able to tell that these were cut on site. That is the end goal of our installation. For the regular band, what we can demonstrate is yet another option. In that case, we had the squares, or what we call soldier courses between bands. In our case, we can use triangles, again, alternating colors. We have a special fitted piece that will close our design. Same thing on this side. I am now just dry laying the pieces for demonstration. One thing to keep in mind, which for this one I did not, you want to make sure every piece is the correct grain orientation. All of my pieces on this side and this side have the grain running the same direction. This particular end is the wrong orientation. So this piece will have to be remilled. For ease of use on a real life installation, any dry fitted piece would, especially when we have a set of elements like that corner design, would be splined together. Like I explained, we want to make sure we maintain that factory locking system. We have our small spline pieces. Every single piece in our design is routed on all sides to make sure we have that locking system. And then again, in order to avoid all of the moving pieces together, once we have everything assembled, lined up, we can add some tape to it and then just handle it and install it as a single block, so that we don't end up doing what I'm doing now. There we have it. Now it's almost like installing a 15 by 15 block. We dry laid, we verified everything fits together. When it's time to assemble and fasten the entire system, we want to make sure, again, everything is locked in, including our pieces. Same thing. All routed, all locked in together. And as far as the fastening system, in this example, we are working with a solid wide plank product. Per National Wood Flooring Association guidelines for installation, anything 3-inch wide and wider is not sufficient to just fasten with mechanical fasteners. We also have to use an adhesive, also known as a glue assist method, which can be observed in this case. We have our adhesive lines, and then we have fasteners that will hold that piece together. Reason for glue assisting a wide plank floor: the only thing with the variation of relative humidity between seasons, especially in some states like Georgia, for example, in the winter time we are struggling with very low humidity, while in the summertime that humidity is going to go through the roof. Your plank flooring, the wider the plank, the more sensitive it is to those variations, will try to expand and contract. When you have a 5-inch piece that's only nailed down, the only thing holding your piece down on the back side would be the tongue of the previous board, and on the front side would be your fasteners, which Hopefully, they are also by the National Wood Flooring Association nailing schedule, which will again vary depending on the width of your plank. We have all of this span of solid wood that's sensitive to relative humidity variations that is unassisted, that nothing holding that down. That would be the reason for using that glue assist method. It's a supplemental element in holding down and making sure our installation does not have excessive movement. We have our glue assist nail down installation on this. We want to make sure we replicate the same fastening system on our border. In this case, we are using 15-inch staples. You can also use 16-inch cleats. Whatever your preferred method is, just make sure you follow the National Wood Flooring Association's nailing schedule. That will also prevent you from having any kind of issues with callbacks, warranty claims, because those will be some of the first things that any kind of inspector or manufacturer's representative will actually check. You want to make sure that you are abiding by all of those specs and instructions and guidelines. This would be considered mid-intricate type of doing a border, whether you put this row between two bands or you just have it by itself and then a band on the outside of it. Again, you can have it as simple as a mitered corner, single band of the same or a contrasting color, or you can go as far as having two bands and any kind of pattern in the middle, soldier course, triangles, a chevron or a herringbone pattern. Why not? Again, sky's the limit. It's something you need to discuss with your client. In closing, if you are interested in more in-depth training and learning about all of the methods and techniques we've discussed today, Floor & Decor at the end of this year will be kicking off a series of trainings in association with NWFA. Additionally, feel free to check out www.nwfa.org. You will find live, in-depth, customized trainings in a city near you. The National Wood Flooring Association also offers industry-specific live training, online training, webinars, and you can also subscribe to a free magazine that's also industry-specific for articles and more in-depth presentations, products of the specific to our wood floor industry. Thank you very much.